I was 30 weeks pregnant the night I was thrown out of my own home like a criminal. No warning. No time to explain. Just a folded piece of paper tossed onto the kitchen counter. And a man I loved staring at me like I had become someone else entirely. They say betrayal feels like a knife in the back, but that's not true. For me, it was a cold, steady burn in my chest. The kind that spreads slowly until it eats through every part of you. One minute, I was a wife folding baby clothes. The next, I was standing outside in the cold, alone, with nothing but a duffel bag and a child kicking inside me. I should have seen it coming. But love has a way of making you blind. Jason had always been quiet, steady, the kind of man who made you feel safe even on your worst days. He wasn't perfect, but he was dependable. And when we found out I was pregnant, his joy felt real. We painted the nursery together. We made lists of baby names. He kissed my stomach every night. We made plans. We were building something. But his mother, Lorraine, had always hated me. From the very first day I met her, she wore her disapproval like perfume. Sweet smiles in public but cold eyes when no one else was watching. She never said anything directly, nothing I could repeat or prove. Just small comments, pointed silences, questions about my background or my ambitions. And always this unspoken message: you are not good enough for my son. I tried to win her over. God, I tried. I baked her favorite pie for every holiday. I complimented her taste, listened to her endless stories about Jason's childhood, laughed when she mocked my job or questioned my choices. I played nice, because I believed that eventually love would soften her edges. But people like Lorraine don't soften, sharpen. When I got pregnant, something shifted in her entirely. She went from disapproving to possessive. Suddenly she was involved in every decision: what I ate, how much I rested, which doctor I saw. She began showing up uninvited to appointments, giving unsolicited advice, inserting herself into every single detail of my life. And Jason, sweet, soft-hearted Jason, thought she was just being helpful. He always took her side when I gently pushed back. Always told me to be patient, she means well. But she didn't mean well. She meant control. And then, out of nowhere, everything changed. Jason grew cold. Distant. He stopped touching me. Stopped looking at me like he used to. He started sleeping in the other room, claiming he didn't want to disturb me. I asked what was wrong, but he shut down. And when I finally pressed him, he just said he needed space. And then came the paper. The paternity test. I remember holding it in my hands, trembling as I read the words. According to the results, there was a 0% chance the baby was his. But the baby hadn't even been born yet. That was the first red flag. A prenatal test that didn't make sense. It didn't matter. The damage was done. He looked at me like I had lied to him, cheated, humiliated him. He didn't ask questions. He didn't give me the chance to explain. He just told me to leave. No conversation. No argument. Just that flat, dead voice: you need to go. And I did. I packed whatever I could fit into 2 bags. Some clothes, a few toiletries, the baby book we'd been filling out together. I didn't even grab shoes. I walked out of the house we made together, my heart in pieces, and sat on the front steps for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I had nowhere to go. No car. No money. My bank account was tied to his. I was pregnant, scared, and suddenly, invisible. The man who swore to protect me had just kicked me into the cold without even blinking. Eventually, I called Tasha, my old college roommate and the only person I could still call family. She lived 40 minutes away, but she drove to get me in 20. She took me in without asking questions, wrapped me in a blanket, and held me while I sobbed into her shoulder. I barely slept that night. Or the night after. The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical. I could feel it in my bones, in every slow heartbeat, in the ache in my chest that no amount of tea or medicine could numb. I was grieving something that was still alive. The betrayal was so deep it felt like a death. For the next few days I moved through the world like a ghost. I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The paper, Jason's eyes, the way he'd let her win. Because that's what it was. This wasn't about Jason. It was about Lorraine. She had finally done it. She had found the one thing that would make him turn on me. And she didn't even have to lift a finger. Just one fake document. That was all it took. And the worst part? No one questioned it. Not Jason. Not his friends. Not the people in town who started whispering when they saw me at the pharmacy. I became the villain in a story I hadn't even written. But as the days passed, something inside me began to shift. Grief gave way to something stronger. Not anger, no. I didn't have the energy for rage. What I felt was clarity. I saw things as they really were. Jason was weak. Lorraine was cruel. And neither of them had expected me to survive this. They thought they'd broken me. That I'd crawl away in shame and disappear from their perfect little world. But they underestimated the one thing I still had. Truth. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even want it. But the thing about people like Lorraine, they always leave a trail. And I was ready to follow it. The first thing I did was stop crying. Not because the pain disappeared, but because it no longer served me. I couldn't afford to fall apart anymore. I had a baby coming and he needed me more than ever. So I started small. I took showers again. I brushed my hair. I drank my prenatal smoothies even when my throat felt like it was closing up. It wasn't some grand transformation. It was survival, slow and painful but steady. Tasha was a godsend. She cleared out her guest room, made it cozy with blankets and a little lamp, and filled the closet with maternity clothes from a friend of hers. She never asked me to explain, never pushed for details. She just made space for me to exist in a world that suddenly had no room for me anywhere else. But when I lay in bed at night staring at the ceiling fan, I replayed every moment from the past 6 months. Every word, every look, every subtle shift in Jason's behavior. And each time I saw it more clearly. Lorraine had been playing a long game. This wasn't spontaneous. It had been methodical, calculated. He'd studied me. Waited for the perfect moment when I was most vulnerable. Pregnant, tired, isolated. Then she struck. And the cruelest part? She used Jason's love for her as a weapon. He was always so desperate for her approval, even as a grown man. Her validation was his currency. And when she dangled it in front of him like a prize, he gave up everything, including me. The betrayal stung more coming from him than it did from her. I'd given him everything. My heart. My trust. My future. I thought we were building a life together. I thought we were a team. And he handed me over to his mother like I was nothing. Like our love was disposable. But the more I thought about that paternity test, the more it gnawed at me. Something about it was off. I couldn't let it go. Even though I was drowning in shame, some small part of me, the part that still had fight left, needed answers. So I started researching. I looked up prenatal paternity tests, how they worked, what they required. And that's when I realized the glaring flaw. You can't run a conclusive prenatal paternity test without a sample from both the potential father and the mother's blood. And Jason, he never told me he submitted a sample. He never asked me to. So how did they get that result? That was the crack. The one that opened everything up. I called every lab in the area. Posed as a curious patient. Asked general questions. And while most wouldn't give me specifics, one receptionist, bless her tired voice, mentioned that they don't do walk-in paternity testing anymore due to privacy violations. Privacy violations. It wasn't much, but it confirmed something I'd suspected. Someone had gotten results they weren't supposed to get. Or worse, manufactured them entirely. Still, I didn't have access to the original paperwork. Jason had taken it with him when he left. And legally, I had no right to it now that he'd filed for divorce. The papers came a week after I moved into Tasha's place. I didn't even open them at first. Just held the envelope like it might explode in my hands. When I finally did, it was like reading a stranger's handwriting. The Jason I knew wouldn't have used the words infidelity and irreconcilable breakdown. But there it was in cold legal print. Lorraine was listed as a witness. Of course she was. At that point I could have fought back. I could have hired a lawyer, challenged the paternity claims, tried to make Jason see reason. But I didn't. Something in me had shifted again. I didn't want to convince someone to love me anymore. I was done begging. What I wanted was peace. A clean slate. And most of all, I wanted my baby to come into the world surrounded by truth, not lies. So I waited. The weeks dragged on. My belly grew. The baby kicked more. And little by little I started to feel alive again. I began working remotely for a local design company Tasha connected me with. Just a few hours a day, but enough to feel like myself. I started journaling. I even went to a prenatal yoga class, despite the whispers from a few women who knew my name from town gossip. I held my head high. They could whisper. Let them. They didn't know the truth. Not yet. And then one morning I got a call. It was from a nurse at the clinic Jason and I had been visiting for my prenatal checkups. She sounded nervous, hesitant, but curious. Hi, Emma. I'm not sure if I should be calling, but, well, I thought you should know. Someone came in last week asking for access to your medical records. Claimed to be a family member. But we have a note on file, your note, saying no one but you and your listed emergency contact can view them. My heart stopped. Who was it? I asked, my voice calm but shaking. I probably shouldn't say. But, her last name started with an M, older woman. Fancy bag. Very insistent. Lorraine. She had tried to get access to my records. She was digging for something. Or worse, trying to plant something new. That call flipped a switch in me. I had tried to take the high road. I had tried to walk away with grace. But she wasn't done. She didn't want me out of the picture, she wanted to erase me. She wanted to rewrite history. So I made a decision that night. I wouldn't play defense anymore. It was time to gather everything I had. Emails, text messages, appointment logs, witness statements. I wasn't going after revenge. I was going after the truth. And once I had it all, I knew exactly who I was going to show it to. Not Jason. The entire town. It's strange how silence can feel louder than screaming. After Jason slammed the door and drove off that night, there wasn't a single sound in the apartment. No ticking clock. No fridge hum. Just the heaviness of my breath and the quiet thud of my heartbeat trying to stay steady. I sat on the floor for hours, unsure whether to scream or sob or just disappear. By morning I was still in the same spot. Legs numb, stomach aching, heart splintered into pieces I couldn't even name. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's face when he said the words, "You lied to me." But I hadn't. I wanted to call him. To beg him to come back. To explain how insane it sounded that I'd cheat on him. How I loved him with everything in me. But he'd made his decision. Lorraine had made sure of that. And I could already hear her voice in his ear, telling him I was trash. That our baby wasn't his, that she always knew I wasn't right for him. I should have left it at that. But I was pregnant, scared, and completely alone. So I went to her house. It was pouring by the time I got there. The rain soaked through my coat, my shoes, everything. But I stood on her porch and knocked. Not because I thought she'd help, but because I wanted to see the look on her face. She opened the door with the smugness of a woman who had won. She barely glanced at me before saying, "You should leave. You're not welcome here anymore." "Why are you doing this?" I asked. My voice shook, but I stood my ground. She smiled like it was nothing. "I'm protecting my son from a gold-digging liar. You played your part, Emma. But we both know this baby isn't his. Don't humiliate yourself." The words were poison, each one deliberate, cruel, calculated. I stared at her, searching her face for some flicker of guilt, of humanity. But she was stone. She was proud of what she'd done. It hit me then. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. She had planned this. She had destroyed my life with precision, and she wasn't going to stop. So I walked away. Not because I was weak. But because I knew that if I stayed 1 minute longer I'd scream until I collapsed. The next few weeks were a blur. I crashed on a friend's couch for a while, my belly growing heavier and my hope thinning out like worn fabric. I couldn't eat. Could barely sleep. The baby kicked sometimes and it reminded me of what I still had. But even that felt like a cruel irony. I was supposed to bring my child into a home full of love. Instead I was clinging to scraps. Jason didn't call. Not once. And I couldn't shake the image of him looking at me like I was a stranger. That expression broke something in me that hadn't healed since. At my lowest, I thought about signing away my rights. I thought maybe the baby would have a better life if I gave them to someone who had stability, who wasn't a mess crying into gas station napkins and skipping prenatal appointments because she couldn't afford the Uber. But then I remembered something. At one of my early checkups, Jason had been there, all soft eyes and hands on my belly. He had been so excited. He'd said, "You're going to be an amazing mom." I clung to that memory like a lifeline. I couldn't give up. So I started over. I found a small shelter that helped pregnant women. It wasn't glamorous. Just a twin bed in a room with peeling paint and 3 other girls in similar situations. But it was safe. And the staff treated me like a human being. I found part-time work answering phones at a local dentist's office. And though the pay was nothing, it gave me something I desperately needed: routine. I began journaling. Not because I expected anyone to read it, but because the words had nowhere else to go. I poured my heartbreak onto every page. Not just about Jason but about how I'd lost myself somewhere along the way. And slowly, painfully I began to come back. The loneliness didn't vanish but it quieted. I made friends at the shelter, women who had been through hell and still smiled. I started attending therapy sessions offered by a volunteer counselor. It was there I learned something that changed everything. During a session I mentioned the paternity test. How it proved Jason wasn't the father. The counselor raised her eyebrows. Did you see the results? Were you there when the test was done? I shook my head. I hadn't thought to question it. That night I couldn't sleep. The idea that Lorraine might have gone that far, faking a test result, felt absurd. But nothing about her cruelty had been mild or accidental. So I started digging. I knew where Jason had gone to get the test. I knew the clinic's name. I called, pretending to be a receptionist at a lawyer's office verifying records for a custody case. They asked for the test number. I had it. Lorraine had left a copy in an envelope that I had photographed before she kicked me out. What they told me turned my stomach. The test wasn't real. It wasn't even in their system. The document Lorraine had waved around like a weapon was nothing but a forgery. She hadn't just destroyed my life, she'd fabricated the very proof that convinced Jason to hate me. I sat with that truth for a long time. Let it sink into the cracks of my broken heart. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a liar. And I wasn't going to let her win. Not anymore. I didn't expect the world to stop just because mine had. Bills still arrived. My body still ached with pregnancy. And somehow the sun had the audacity to rise each morning like nothing had happened. I didn't cry much after those first few days. Not because it didn't hurt, God it did. But because there was a numbness that wrapped itself around me like armor. Grief had burned me out. I was a hollow, walking version of myself, carrying a child whose father now doubted his very existence. The one thing that kept me from completely falling apart was my baby. When I felt that first flutter, barely a whisper of movement in my belly, I remember gasping, hands splayed across my skin like I could somehow protect both of us from everything. That moment grounded me. I was no longer just a woman discarded by her husband. I was a mother. And I would not let this world destroy me before my child even arrived. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, one of those places that smelled like old linoleum and fresh regrets. My neighbor was a retired librarian who fed stray cats and offered me leftover soup without asking too many questions. For the first time in a long while, kindness didn't come with strings or suspicions. I got a remote job doing admin work for a small company that didn't care about my personal life. I worked odd hours, resting when I could, grateful for the distraction. Each day I grew a little stronger, if only because I had no other choice. My belly grew and so did a quiet resolve inside me. I wasn't going to be the story they whispered about in town, the girl who got knocked up and tossed aside. I was going to be something more. What hurt the most wasn't even Jason's betrayal. It was knowing how easily he believed I could betray him. How quickly he let his mother's lies shape our story. I kept playing that night over in my head like a broken record. His cold eyes, the envelope, the way he didn't even ask me if it was true. He didn't give me the decency of a question. Just a verdict. So I didn't chase him. I never once called him. If he wanted to throw away his family on the word of a bitter woman, that was his burden to live with. And Lorraine. I didn't have the energy to hate her. But I couldn't forget either. Not the way she looked at me like I was trash on her doorstep. Not the way she smirked when she handed me that fake report like she had finally won. I couldn't prove anything, not yet. But something in me whispered that her lies would catch up to her. People like her, who thrive on manipulation and control, they always slip eventually. You can't build a life out of poison and not expect the fumes to choke you someday. Time moved. Slower than I wanted but faster than I realized. One evening I stood in the mirror weeks from my due date, staring at the version of myself I barely recognized. My face had softened, my body fuller. But behind my tired eyes, something fierce had taken root. I wasn't broken anymore. I was becoming something else. Stronger. Wiser. Quietly dangerous in my own way. And then, as if fate had been holding its breath, the first crack in their perfect little lie came. I got a call from Dr. Emerson's office, Jason's family doctor. I hadn't spoken to her since the night everything fell apart. I expected coldness or judgment. But what I got instead was confusion. "Emma," she said gently, "I just realized something odd. I never authorized the paternity test result Jason showed you. In fact, I don't even have a record of that test being processed through our lab. The words hit me like a freight train. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She continued, hesitant. I'm not trying to pry. But something isn't adding up. I wanted to reach out just in case you weren't aware. I wasn't aware. I was breathless with realization. My knees nearly gave out. The report, Lorraine had given it to Jason. She'd insisted on managing it. Jason never saw the test done, just the envelope she delivered. My hands shook as I ended the call. I stared at my phone like it might explode with more truth. My heart pounded with a new kind of fire, righteous, scalding. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the manipulation. The lies were real. And now I finally had a thread to pull. I didn't want revenge, not really. But I wanted truth. I wanted my child to one day know that his mother fought for him even when the world turned its back. And in that moment, I knew the reckoning had only just begun. I never knew what adrenaline felt like until I stood in front of Lorraine's gated house, clutching the very report she had forged. It was late, maybe 9 p.m., and the lights were still on. I didn't plan to confront her like this, but when Dr. Emerson mailed me the real, untouched paternity report, with Jason listed as the father, I couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe, couldn't stop trembling. I had tried to be silent. I had tried to rebuild my life quietly without stirring the waters. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my son's right to the truth, and about the woman who tried to erase both of us. The door opened before I could knock. Jason stood there. His hair was unkempt, eyes red. He looked thinner, like someone had drained the color out of him. I froze, unsure if I even wanted to see him yet. But he stepped aside without a word, letting me in. I expected hostility. Instead there was just guilt. Lorraine's in the sunroom, he said quietly. I walked past him, past the sterile living room, past the photos of him and his brothers that Lorraine proudly displayed while I was always absent. In the sunroom, Lorraine sat with a glass of wine, flipping through a magazine. Her expression didn't change when she saw me. Well, she said with a smirk. Back for more drama? I didn't speak. I walked to the coffee table and dropped the envelope. She looked at it, still unmoved. That's the real test, I said. From Dr. Emerson. I have her on record confirming she never authorized the one you gave Jason. Her smile faltered just for a second. That's funny, she replied. Because Jason already made his choice. I turned to Jason, who had followed me inside. You never asked me, I said. You never even gave me a chance to explain. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His face twisted, pain and shame battling for dominance. Do you know how that night broke me? My voice cracked. I was carrying your child. I had given up everything to build a life with you. And you didn't even ask. You let your mother hand you a lie and swallowed it whole. Lorraine stood then, glass trembling in her hand. I was protecting my son. From a gold digger. From you. I laughed bitterly. Protecting him? You destroyed his family. Don't pretend you're innocent, she spat. You came into our lives like a virus. You changed him. He was going to be a partner at the firm. Now look at him, working remote, moping around like a sick puppy. I didn't change him, I snapped. You never let him be a man. You controlled every step he took. Jason finally spoke, voice low and raw. Mom, did you fake the test? She hesitated. That one heartbeat was all he needed. Did you? He barked. Of course I did it for you, she screamed. You would have been trapped. She was ruining everything. The room fell silent. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat. Jason stared at his mother like he didn't know her. Maybe he didn't. Maybe none of us did. He turned to me, eyes wet. Emma, I'm sorry. I was stupid. I believed her because it was easier than facing my own fears. I didn't want to admit I didn't feel ready. But I never should have left you like that. I never should have believed. You didn't just leave, I said quietly. You erased me. Tears slid down my face, but I didn't sob. I was done falling apart. Lorraine sat back down, suddenly looking very small. Like a woman caught in her own trap. I want nothing from you, I told her. No apologies. No fake tears. But you won't be in our lives. You don't get to rewrite our story ever again. Jason stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on my shoulder. Can I be part of his life? Please. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to try. I want to fix what I broke. I stared at him for a long moment. There was no easy answer. No magic word that could undo the months of pain. But he looked shattered. And real. You'll need to prove it, I said. Not with words. With action. Because I won't let anyone hurt my son the way you both hurt me. He nodded slowly, tears rolling down his cheeks. Whatever it takes. I walked out of that house feeling 20 pounds lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because I finally stopped carrying their shame. As I reached the car, my phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Emerson again. You were right to follow your instinct. And just so you know, Lorraine also submitted Jason's DNA from a blood draw she brought in herself. He never came to the clinic in person. I suspect she faked his sample too. We're launching a quiet investigation. I stared at the screen, stunned. So not only had Lorraine forged my report, she forged his too. The entire thing had been a scam from start to finish. She hadn't just lied. She had broken the law. And now, the cracks were about to turn into a full-blown collapse. I never thought peace could feel this quiet. Not empty, not lonely, just still like the air after a long, punishing storm. It had been nearly a year since everything unraveled, and in that time I had rebuilt myself, piece by trembling piece. The truth had done its work. Jason and Lorraine didn't just lose me, they lost the illusion they clung to. The DNA retest had ripped away the last thread of their lies. Jason tried to come crawling back, of course. He showed up at my door one rainy evening, drenched and desperate, mumbling apologies, asking to be part of our son's life. But it was too late. The man who once let his mother destroy his own family stood in front of me like a stranger, his eyes hollow and voice shaking. He asked if we could talk. I let him say his piece, then quietly told him I'd be filing for sole custody. I had the evidence, the court documents, the timeline of Lorraine's tampering, and every manipulative message she had ever sent me. My lawyer said it would be an easy win, and it was. Lorraine, meanwhile, had become something of a pariah in town. Word got around fast. About the fake test. The expulsion. The court ruling. The entire community saw through her mask, and the reputation she clung to like a crown turned to ash. Even her social circle began to drift away. Women who once sipped tea with her in floral dresses started whispering instead, crossing the street when they saw her. She tried to hold on to her charity board positions and her image, but you can't outrun truth when it walks beside you like a shadow. And her son? He moved in with her after I refused him. Poetic, really. They deserved each other. Two people trapped in a web they spun from lies. As for me, I didn't need to punish them. I didn't need to watch them squirm or fall apart. My revenge was never in seeing them suffer. It was in standing on my own 2 feet again. It was watching my son smile in a home filled with warmth and safety. It was finding laughter again, real laughter, the kind that starts deep in your belly and rolls out of you like sunlight. I got a promotion at work not long after. I started teaching evening classes for women who wanted to rebuild their lives after toxic relationships. Every time I looked into the eyes of a woman who'd been broken by betrayal, I saw a reflection of myself, and I told them, you don't need to chase revenge. You need to choose peace and let the truth do what it always does. Because it always comes back around. A few months later, I heard Jason had lost his job. Something about missing deadlines, being distracted, spiraling emotionally. I didn't rejoice. I didn't smirk. I just sat with the knowledge that choices have consequences. Lorraine stopped showing up to community events. People said she barely left her house. And while she might have once felt powerful enough to destroy lives with a whisper, now her voice carried no weight. Not even her own son listened anymore. The throne she built for herself was now a cold, empty chair in a house full of silence. And I was free. Free to decorate the nursery in colors I loved. Free to spend my weekends exploring trails with my son strapped to my back in a carrier. Free to fall asleep at night without fear or second-guessing. That freedom wasn't something anyone could give me. I had to carve it out of pain and carry it with me through every sleepless night and courtroom battle. But I did it. And sometimes, just sometimes, I still think about that day in the doctor's office, when I held the real test results in my hand and felt the world tilt. I remember the girl I was before, all trust and tenderness, and I grieve her. But I don't wish her back. She had to break so that I could rise. And rise I did. If you made it to the end of my story, thank you for listening. If you've ever been lied to, betrayed, or cast out by the people who should have protected you, I hope my voice reminds you that truth doesn't need an army. It just needs time. And when karma finally knocks, it doesn't miss. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. New stories drop every single day, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.